Hi guys, we spoke last week about being underwhelmed by Super Rugby, and Ryan, I think you'd probably agree with me in that it was an underwhelming weekend as we thought it would be. You know, Bulls losing to Sunwolves, Stormers losing to the Jaguars, both really disappointing games from a South African perspective. And looking now, you know, the Lions lost to the Sharks. They're struggling to even hold on to the top spot in the SA conference. Maybe only them in the playoffs. The Sharks just outside of the qualifying position as we near that knockout stage. It's not looking that great from a South African perspective, and I think, you know, we've been chatting a little bit about the coaching situation for our SA teams, and you're of the belief that there might be a coaching crisis in our rugby.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm absolutely convinced of it, in fact. And so I think let's start by saying that the players, it would be remiss not to put a big part of that responsibility and the blame on the players. The players have a responsibility to execute the tactics that are laid out before them. But I've got massive reservations about the quality of those tactics that have been put out. And again, like, you know, I use an example of the Stormers game against the Jaguars, and we were talking, and I said to you, like, I watched that game twice over just to understand tactically what is going wrong with the Stormers. I've said before that I'm not a big fan of Robbie Fleck. I think he should be replaced, even at this stage of the tournament. I don't see any value in continuing with him there, because I don't think he's of the competency level required to steer the ship that is the Stormers. I watched a game twice over to understand tactically what was going wrong, and it was just so one-dimensional for me. It was like the season was on repeat. Like I was just watching the same thing over and over and over again. There was no. Sure, the game management is a player issue. I felt like at critical times players made bad decisions. But the best coaches train their team up to transition through difficult periods like that. And I know I've been speaking about Fleck a lot because for me he's the most incompetent of the lot. But he's not alone. Like I'm not inspired tactically by any of these South African franchises. And sure. You know, Mitch at the Bulls, to lose to the Sunwolves, I mean, come on, man. Come on, really. And the way they lost as well. Tactically, just lacked any sort of inspiration. I'm really concerned about this. I don't know what your view is.
Yeah, I think I would just counter with, you know, a factor that perhaps we overlook is that just as much as there's a player drain going overseas, you know, there's a lure for some of the top coaches to rather go and coach overseas and in those sort of environments. Beyond that, you know, a lot of the franchises really facing money problems, and I just wonder whether they can really afford to keep and to attract, you know, top quality coaches from around the world that they may want. For me, it's leading to situations where you're getting somewhat inexperienced coaches having to skip a few levels before they get to Super Rugby.
Right.
And that's where I think there's a problem. Robbie Fleck probably wasn't quite at the stage of being ready to coach to be head coach of a Super Rugby side. You know, he should have really developed under Eddie Jones, but in that forced situation with Eddie going to England, he had to step up to the plate. Rob du Preez comes in after guys like Jake White and Gary Gold. You know, we're at the Sharks having, you know, been involved with the box and really paid their dues as coaches. So again, perhaps moving a level up a bit quicker than expected. So you've got those guys having to kind of learn on the job to a degree.
Yeah.
For me, I've got no problem with Swayze de Bruin. He learned under Ackers. He's such an experienced coach.
Yeah.
You know, he's paid his dues, and I think, you know, I think he'll do good things with the Lions the longer he's there.
Yeah, agreed.
And the Bulls have gone to Mitch. You know, they had obviously problems with their coaching before they got to him. They realised they needed to actually make a big change and pay the bucks to get in the coach.
Right.
Like him.
Yeah, and I think it goes even further back than that. And you ask, who's coaching our school coaches? Because that's where the pool of coaches come from, generally speaking. Former players are obviously in vogue right now with South African franchises, but if you know, a couple of years back, Jake White had an academy of sorts where he was coaching the coaches. That was his business. That was after the World Cup. SARugbymag had gotten rid of him, and this is how he made his living. He was coaching coaches. I thought it was such a great concept. Ultimately, it didn't work out. The business folded, but the concept was excellent for me. I was having a discussion with a former pro just yesterday, and we were talking about the tools needed to make an exceptionally good coach. If you think about the coaches at our elite schools, they've only ever coached talented rugby players. So they've relied on that aspect, that dimension of the coaching ability entirely. They've only ever coached talented players. When you get to a level above that, provincial level, because of the landscape of our country politically, there's a whole mix of different types of players there. Some may have come from schools where they weren't exposed to great conditioning programs, great coaching, etc., etc., etc. So you've got to coach those guys up. Then there's a new dimension where there's guys that actually need a coach who's emotionally in tune and emotionally mature, can put the arm around them, can distinguish between the players that need a tongue lashing and the players that need a cuddle, right? And I think that's one critical aspect where our coaches are lacking. And so I know I'm speaking about all sorts of different dimensions of coaching here. Fundamentally, SA Rugby needs to look at who's coaching our coaches. We need a guy or a department at SA Rugby guiding these elite coaches, training them up in all facets of coaching, including the emotional component of it as well. And so I think, yes, you make a valid point. Guys must learn the systems, and that's why I think a coach like John Dobson, for instance, at Western Province, he's been in the system, he's earned his stripes. He's the next guy. That's who must coach the Stormers for me. But you make valid points, and I think it goes even a step back. There's a responsibility on SA Rugby to put in place structures to coach our elite coaches. Otherwise, we're going to be having this conversation 5 years, 6 years, 10 years time.
And I think as well, I mean, that's something that Rassie, when he steps back and looks at his role as director of rugby, because that's still a very important role that he's got to fulfill beyond being the Bok head coach. He's got to look at who's in the franchise coaching structures. Are the guys getting supported? The head coaches, are they being supported enough? And make no mistake, I mean, that's why Dick Muir came in at the Sharks, because they needed a guy to a degree to counterbalance Rob Dupree's style of coaching. Right. And Dick's definitely a guy who's a very popular and very good man manager. He would have definitely counterbalanced that sort of thing. Does Swayster Brain have the support he needs at the Lions with Akers having gone overseas? I'm not so sure he does. Does Mitch have the support at the Bulls? So in terms of looking at their assistants and the coaching group as a whole and as a unit, instead of just laying all the blame on the head coach, I don't think Robbie Fleck has the support he really needs. I'm not sure there's clarity over the structures over the assistants. They've got very differing roles. A guy like Paul True and so on. I think it's a thing that we don't really look at sometimes is the unit gelling, and I'm not so sure it is at franchise level.
Yeah, and good point, like really good point. And it's an aspect of Flex, the whole Flex situation that has bothered me. It has bothered me, but as a professional franchise, they've got to sort that out internally. They can't. You can't go and Fleck goes like, I didn't get my guys. I didn't get the team that I wanted. Well, then speak to the whoever makes those decisions at Western Province Rugby and get the team that you want, because ultimately he's responsible for the results and accountable for the performances and the results. So yeah, it's a tough one, but I get you. And the other aspect is that we don't have a lack of talented coaches. If you look at the guys that you mentioned earlier on, some coaches that have gone abroad, like Johan Ackerman is a prime example, but there's others. Like for me, Johan van Grans, for me, is brilliant rugby mind, like brilliant rugby mind. I had the pleasure of learning some tactical aspects of the game from him as a young writer when he was at the Bulls. He was generous with his time. He taught me the game in many ways. His rugby mind is brilliant, like brilliant. The talent is definitely there. Just like South Africa will never have a low percentage talent pool from a player's perspective, we won't ever have a low percentage talent pool from a coaching perspective, but that talent needs to be nurtured in the same way our players are nurtured. And SA Rugby needs to understand that it's a critical investment that they must make. In the same way they invest in the players, you've got to invest in your coaching and your coaching structures so that things can happen methodically. Like you mentioned earlier on, guys need to ascend the ranks. There's occasionally a former player that will come in and make a massive impact immediately. I think the New Zealand sort of landscape is prime sort of ground for that to happen. it's a great rugby culture to come into as a coach, even as an inexperienced coach. And you get a guy like Todd Blackadder, for example, who came in with maybe not as much experience as some of his peers, but thrived in that environment. And that's the type of environment I think we have to create, and we can create if the will and investment is there.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think we could probably talk about this, but yeah, definitely a relevant topic in terms of thinking about just the coaches and the quality that's surrounding our head coaches. But let's move into predictions and look at the weekend. Obviously now we're going to see what they can produce in the final few weeks of Super Rugby. Bulls, Jaguars. The Bulls really recently have been disappointing, and they've lost their way. For me, I really thought that they were really on the up under Mitch, but they've obviously found that there are a few more problems than they thought, maybe in terms of depth and that sort of thing. It makes it a really difficult game to call with the Jags I think they're on a 7-match winning streak now. They come to Loftus. For me, the Bulls are just a better team than they've shown over recent weeks, and at home, I'm going to back them to get a win of 5-8.
Interesting. Yeah. The Bulls have been so disappointing for me, mostly because I think their squad is really good. And there's gold to be mined there. And I thought Mitch, it may be premature to make an absolute judgment on Mitch now, but I thought he'd be further down the road at this point. So the Bulls have been really disappointing for me. I'm going the other way. I think the Jags have been outstanding, and I think they know why they're winning and how to replicate those performances over and over again, which is critical, which the difference between a team that just finds himself on a good run and kind of just goes with it, and a team that have actually changed things tactically to engineer the path that they are now. And I think the Jags are the latter, and I think they'll beat the Bulls this weekend, and they'll beat them by 7-10.
You may well be right, and on that sort of note, I shudder to think how many games I predicted wrong when it comes to the Sharks, because
you and I both.
Again last weekend they were added on the back foot for so much of the game against the Lions, and yet the Sharks' defence really just kept them in the game, and then in the final quarter they got 2 tries against the run of play to get a win. So I think they're slowly building a bit of momentum and a bit of an idea of how they want to go about winning. It's very traditional sort of Sharks rugby, what we've come to know in recent years of that strong defence really laying their foundation and then really striking as the game moves into the latter stages. For me, it's going to be interesting to see now how they come up against the Stormers at home. I don't think the Sharks actually mind playing at Newlands, and I just don't see anything from the Stormers to give me much confidence. So I'm gonna back the Sharks to get this one, maybe an win of 8-10. But yeah, I've been getting them wrong.
We're not watching that one for the quality of rugby. The Sharks are a prime example of a team that I described first when I was speaking about the Jaguars. They're a team for me that don't know how to replicate performances. So they get on the kind of crest of a wave and in the game, and they can blow you away in a short period of time, like we saw against the Lions. But they don't know how to replicate that week in, week out. They don't have that culture. They don't have. I think that they don't have the tactical intelligence, and that goes all the way up to the top with the head coach, Rob Dupree. I don't think they got the tactical intelligence and the tactical blueprint to replicate that week in, week out. That combined with the Stormers' home form, I mean, I wouldn't call them to win most games away from home, but they're formidable at Newlands for some reason. I don't know. It's just. Maybe it's the collection of players and the way they wired, the comforts of home. I don't know, I can only speculate, but there's something about them at Newlands. I think they'll beat the Sharks, and I think they'll beat the Sharks convincingly, like 10-15.
Yeah. Well, cool. Thanks, Ryan. Well, let's hope for a good derby on Saturday in Cape Town. The weather's cleared up a bit, so that's great.
Cool.